Fáilte go dtí an episód sa Ceist na Teangan. Podcrail Finghin Mac agus a star de aine atá fistrop faoi our gadrúh léithí agus a role in our bhéiniúlacht. Welcome to the Language Question, a podcast about the Irish language and its history for anyone curious about our relationship with it and its role in our identity. Maris Gnág, bí cinnte a chlárú ag thelanguagequestion.com/resources chun de acmhainní fálam to Sarah Ashka all agus a bheith ar an eolas faoi gachród atá ar siúl ar an show. As usual, please be sure to sign up at thelanguagequestion.com/resources to be sure to get your complimentary, valuable learning resources and to stay up to date, upcoming episodes, guests, and to receive exclusive content. Peish Gaeilge, Shulling, and when tú soltas. Anyhow, here goes. I hope you enjoy it. Colm Ó Broin is an Irish speaker from Clondalkin in Dublin who works for the Irish language newspapers Law and Gaelscoil and who has written articles about the language for the Journal.ie, Shopton and the Irish Times. He has a long-standing interest in the underlying attitudes people in Ireland have to the language and how they affect their interactions with it. As part of this, he runs a campaign with Conradh na Gaeilge that tackles some of the myths and misconceptions about Irish, which has included public talks, webinars and a TED Talk. He is a strong advocate of the Gaelscoil movement and spent some years as Cathaoirleach of Coiste Gaeilge Winter Chronáin, a community group in Clondalkin that promotes the Irish language and has recently been researching the dialects of Irish historically spoken in Leinster. A Colm a chur tá fáilte is fiche ród go dtí an show agus tám tharbheith buíoch díot as a bheith linn.
Gur míle mágad in agus gur mágad an chuireamh an seo.
Well, we are genuinely delighted to have you with us, Colm, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us to have this conversation. I'm really looking forward to it and have been for some time. What I'd like to do, Colm, as I do with all of our guests here at the beginning, is I suppose to go back to the beginning and just to I'd love if you would just talk to us about what has Irish looked like in your life growing up and how that evolved from then on in your life.
Yeah, so I went through the Gaelscoil system. So I was in a Nínara and in a primary school and a secondary school. So that's how I became fluent in Irish. Now, my parents could speak Irish conversationally, and they actually met in Conradh in Dublin, but they kind of felt that they weren't fluent enough to speak, to raise us through Irish. But it was always kind of something that we had an interest in, that we always were very positive towards the language. Even in primary school, I can remember going into school in high babies and kind of realizing, I can actually speak this language and feeling kind of proud of that. And it's like anything that a kid might learn, like how to learn to ride a bike or whatever it is. But I just remember being really positive about it. And then later on, I remember in 5th class, for some reason, the amount of Irish being spoken in the yard kind of reduced. And I was a bit disappointed about this. So from a young age, I had this interest in it, this grow for the language. And then in secondary school, we would have spoken Irish in the yard, but it was mainly because the teachers told us to. But then, say, by the time we were in 5th and 6th year, I suppose we were a bit more mature or something. Maybe we valued the language a bit more, and we just started speaking Irish because we wanted to, So then after school, I went to the college in Trinity, and I'd run into people I was in school with there the odd time, and I'd talk Irish to them. I wasn't really a member of the common Gaeltacht. But anytime I met someone who could speak Irish, I'd always be happy to speak it to them. I wouldn't say I'd go out of my way like to speak Irish, or I wouldn't go up the club in Conradh, or I wasn't like an activist, that type of thing. But I was always very kind of positive, had a positive attitude towards it. And then I went over to Australia after college for a year, and when I was there, I met some people, some Aussies who'd been over doing voluntary work in East Timor. So I went over there for a few months teaching English, and that was a real eye-opener in terms from a language point of view, because it's a tiny country, but they have like 15 languages. Like, it's about the size of Munster or Leinster, and everyone is at least bilingual. They all speak their local language. There's a lingua franca that's spoken in the city, so everyone knows that's the second language. A lot of people spoke Indonesian because they were occupied by Indonesia. A lot of the older people spoke Portuguese because it used to be a Portuguese colony. And then they also might know one or two of the other local languages. So, I was surrounded by people who were totally bilingual, trilingual, and even more. And a lot of them maybe hadn't even been to school or maybe done primary school. And it just got me thinking, like, why do we make such a song and dance of it in Ireland about just being bilingual when it shouldn't be as complicated as we make it, or there shouldn't be so much kind of heartache and crockery about. So that definitely kind of spurred me on a bit more when I came home to want to do something with the Irish language. So I did a course in communications down in Galway, and then I started working for some Irish language newspapers, the ones you mentioned, Law and Gaelscoil. So yeah, just the rare Haley, just my interest and my involvement in with the language, with the Irish speaking community, just kind of grew and grew over the years. And then I did the campaign with Conradh and Gaeilge, so I suppose that's probably my main kind of interaction with the language at the moment.
Sure, sure. So you've been immersed in the language from primary school, effectively. And so what did that look like then outside of school? Was Irish the language of the household at home?
No, it wasn't. Yeah, so as I was saying, like my parents, they just didn't think they were fluent enough, so to raise us through Irish. So we were raised speaking English at home. But interestingly, over the past maybe 10 years or so, we've kind of turned into an Irish speaking household. So with my parents, with my brothers, and with my sister, now we speak Irish most of the time. So it was a kind of a decision I'm not sure when it happened exactly or how, but I would say nowadays, most of the time we would speak Irish to each other. And then all
Okay.
the next generation, like, would all go to Gaelscoil, and then so I'd speak Irish with my nieces and nephews, and with my own kids as well.
And with your own case, I mean, do you speak, is your household, do you speak in your daily life, would Irish be your kind of ordinary language of communication, or is it something that you just kind of go into for specific purposes?
No, well, I speak Irish at home all the time. My wife is an Irish teacher, so she's fluent, and then I speak Irish to her and to my two boys as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm speaking
Wonderful.
Irish every day of the week, basically.
And Clondalkin, where you are from, is there a strong Irish language kind of community there? I get the feeling that's something you've been heavily involved. I know you've been Cahirlock of the Irish language community there and so on. What does that look like?
So it's it's an interesting question because, people will often mention Clondalkin as a kind of an area where Irish is stronger than other places, and that there's a Irish language community there. So I mean that is absolutely true. That there's Winter Cronan has been working with the Irish language for 50 years, more than 50 years now. So it's set up three different Gaelscoileanna, so two in Clondalkin and one in Rathcoole, and then there's a secondary school as well. Then there's Áras Cronan, which is an Irish cultural centre. So I mean, there's loads of people in Clondalkin who speak Irish. There's a group who would go to a lot of events in Áras Cronan and be heavily involved, and a group of Irish speakers, and be heavily involved in a lot of community kind of events, St. Patrick's Day parade, or a lot of the stuff that's happened with St. Bridget's Day in the last few years. A lot of their work around getting an interpretive centre at the Round Tower in Clondalkin. So there is a group of Irish speakers who are kind of active in that way. And then, like, there's an Irish language mass, every Sunday. And then there's lots of people around who went through the Gaelscoil system. Now, it's not a Gaeltacht. It's not. I'm not sure how you would define it. I mean, it has the leaner Gaeilge status, which is something that the government brought in a few years ago. But like, if you're walking around Clondalkin, you might hear some Irish spoken the odd time, but it wouldn't be very regular thing.
I'm just fascinated by that, and that's why I just wanted to kind of just probe into that a little bit, because it's I have a memory of being down in West Kerry actually one summer a few years ago, and meeting a man, and he was from Clondalkin, and I was just curious. It seems that there is a strong Irish core there, and it's something that you don't often necessarily kind of you think of. I know you're saying it's not a Gaeltacht, but there is a strong Irish language ethos, and there's those initiatives going on around the place. And that's just absolutely fantastic to hear about. But what does that look like? Because one of the biggest challenges I face as a learner on a daily basis is opportunities to use the language in my just daily life as I go about things, without making a bit of a song and dance about it, and maybe imposing it on anyone else. But does that arise in Clondalkin? Do you have the opportunity to speak Irish? I mean, outside of your household, and are there places that you go that you know that you're going to meet or have a good chance of meeting people who you'll be able to have a conversation, ask Gaeilge and so on?
I don't know if I'd say a good chance, but maybe like an increased chance. So there's a bar in our Scrollan, and most of the time, most of the bar staff there can speak Irish. Obviously, bar staff can change a lot, and it's not always easy to get bar staff, let alone bar staff with Irish. But a lot of the time, the staff there will speak Irish, and you might just meet someone in our Scrollan who speaks Irish. You might just meet them in the shops or whatever. But yeah, it's not like a Gaeltacht where you're going to be meeting people every day or on a regular basis,
Where it's a community language, shall we say?
Yeah, I mean, so that there is still a need for Irish language events to be organised. If you really want to meet people who speak Irish, there's like a Circle Conradh, and then there's like a cards night as well down at the Oris. So it still needs that bit of organisation. I mean, there's a few things I tried while I was on the Quiz to Gaeilge, like giving out badges during Shopping to Gaeilge to all the staff in the shops, and because you'd have a lot of ex-pupils from the Gaelscoil working in the shops. But I suppose it's hard to keep that type of initiative going. And then you can have, if you know someone in a particular shop or a particular bar who was in the Gaelscoil, you can speak Irish to them. But I don't know if it's hit and miss, but it's not like regular, but it's not non-existent either, I suppose.
I know what you mean, that it's not just there as a continuous kind of effortless thing. It requires people to actually organize and do this thing. But just talk to me again. So then, but when you went, cause just on third level, did you study Irish at third level, or was it a different subject? Okay.
No, I did science in Trinity. I suppose I didn't have an interest in doing a degree in Irish. Same way as I wouldn't personally have an interest in doing a degree in English. I was more interested in if I could have done my science degree through Irish, I would have, but that option wasn't there. It wasn't really until I did the course in Galway that I got a better understanding of a lot of the grammar rules around Irish, because I wasn't really aware of most of them, having gone through school. Even though it was a Gaelscoil, like we didn't. I mean, I remember once in fifth year, the Irish teacher tried to teach us all the declainty, and just people's eyes were kind of glazing over, and he would just say, "Oh, you're always going on going. We know it by speaking it. Like, we don't have to learn this." So yeah, there was loads of grammar rules that I wasn't aware of. The whole "you have a shave you on a muckle banish," I had no idea that was the case, for example, and lots of other things as well.
And so tell me, how did it happen then when you came back? So you went to Australia, you went to East Timor. That's fascinating about the language experience there, because I suppose it just shows us that monolingualism is actually the exception. And I think we're very, very lazy in relation to that as English speakers, because you kind of have so much access to so much internationally, and so many people in other languages will try to learn English because it is an international language of business and entertainment and so on. But the natural kind of state really is multilingualism, as you mentioned there in East Timor, where people are living in, and you mentioned the idea of having a local language, a lingua franca, and then different colonial languages for political reasons. And And that's in a community of, a tiny
500,000 people,
population.
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're here having a kind of a breakdown about Irish and the number of speaking it in a population of 5 million. But what then, when you came back then, I suppose you had studied science, you had been in Australia, and you came back then and you went into Irish language media. What motivated you to go down that route?
So, I mean, I'd always had an interest in politics and current affairs and journalism. That was one of the reasons I was in East Timor in the first place, because I'd been aware of the Indonesian occupation and what they'd gone through and so on. So, yeah, I wanted to give journalism a shot, and then I found out there was this course in Galway that I could do to wear. So I decided to do that, and then I got the gigs with law and Gaelscoil out of that.
And that's interesting too. Were they print publications?
Yeah, yeah, they were. Yeah, law was a daily paper, and then Gaelscoil was a weekly one.
Yeah, because we don't have, I mean, apart from what the supplement within the Irish Independent on a Wednesday, Shockton and the Irish Times does Scale on a Tuesday, there isn't kind of a regular print news media in Irish anymore. What's your thoughts around that? What was it like as a journalist in that industry at the time, and what are your reflections on that as a thing that, how necessary or important would that be for the language?
Yeah, well, I mean, I really enjoyed it. One of the benefits of being a journalist is that if you're watching watching the news and a politician is saying something that you think doesn't make any sense, instead of just shouting at the telly, you can ring them the following day and ask them questions about it. But no,
Mhm.
I really enjoyed being a journalist, and I mean, it definitely helps to promote the language that you have a daily newspaper. But obviously, it's very difficult with a minority language that to keep a daily newspaper on the go. Or there probably still is there's a European organization of daily minority newspapers. And we were at a few conferences, and nearly all of them were getting some sort of funding from their local governments. So Law was getting funding from the Irish government, from First na Gaeilge, and it needed that to keep going. I mean, a lot of minority media does need support from the government, and just basically because of the financial crash, it was decided to withdraw the funding. So I mean, yeah, it's. I mean, I don't think that there's ever going to be a daily printed newspaper in the Irish language in the future. I mean, given what's happening to English language papers, let alone minority language papers. So yeah, I mean, I suppose it's a pity it no longer exists, but I suppose we just have to move on and make the best of it.
Yeah, and I suppose we have to think about it in the context of, as you say, the kind of transformation of the media landscape that's happening with the decline in just paper subscriptions generally, I suppose. But it's just interesting the fact that that's something we've had multiple kind of iterations of Irish language newspapers, and that is the thing that just no longer exists. I mean, we've got Turas.ie, which is fantastic. But I was just curious on your take on that. I mean, you've since regularly been contributing with the journal.ie.
Well, I've done various articles over the years with the Journal and with Shockton and with the Irish Times and so on. It's I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's more of a hobby, you could say, rather than a job as such. So yeah, I mean, I had articles in the Journal about the myth busting campaign, and then one in the Irish Times in 2024 about about Peg, about the book Peg,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of the kind of nonsense that's said about it. And then I just had an article there in Shockton recently about a kneecap gig I was at in December.
But just talk to me there specifically about that myth busting campaign that you've done with Conradh, because I've seen videos that you've done in relation to that, and I think that's very, very interesting, and I'd love for you to explain to us what exactly that was, and how you came to conceive that idea.
Yeah, so being interested in current affairs and politics, my whole life, I would have been reading the Irish Times and watching the news and watching questions and answers and listening to politics debates on the radio. And every so often somebody would publish an article in one of the papers with some kind of crazy claims about the Irish language. And it just seemed that the same ones are just being repeated. It was like a cycle. Every so often the same thing would just be said again and again. One day I just got kind of sick of the whole thing and said, right, I'm actually going to write down what are the most common ones. And then I'm just going to analyze them kind of methodically, piece by piece, to see, is there any logic to them? Did it make any sense at all? I started with, that Irish is a dead language. Then the next one was about that Irish has lots of made up words. This thing of the telephone and taxi and law on a bus and this type of thing. And then other ones are around, the Irish was associated with poverty. We'd be poor if we spoke Irish instead of English. The Gaelscoileanna are elitist. That's a fairly new one. Then Republicans have hijacked the language. Another one is around, the newest one is about the Irish language names and how we're told that they're not logical or they're not phonetic and so on. And then other ones then about, say, the amount of public spending on the Irish language or services being provided through Irish, or Irish being an official language of the EU. And then another one was around this idea of that Irish isn't somehow connected to kind of social conservatism or the Catholic Church in some way, or social repression in some way that you do come across every so often. So yeah, I wrote out all these different ones. Then I've done various public talks about them. I've done videos with Conradh Gaeilge, which I put on YouTube, kind of short videos. I've done webinars, did a TED talk as well. And then I've done a package for teachers. So if teachers are hearing these things in their class, they can, use have like a PowerPoint for them that they can then go through the different myths with their students. So there's two reasons for it. One is that any type of illogical argument just annoys me. It doesn't have to be about the Irish language. It could be anything about, climate change or whatever the case may be. But then the other was, what I kind of realized was, when I started off, it was very much kind of focused on each particular one. But by the end of it, I was kind of beginning to realize, well, why do these exist in the first place? Why are there so many of these myths about the Irish language? Why have they been around for so long? I mean, some of them are hundreds of years old. Why are new ones being invented as well? And what does that tell us about kind of attitudes to the language and claims?
Would you mind just telling us your take on that? Because for people, let's say, who haven't maybe seen the videos or whatever, where do you think that comes from?
So if somebody's making a claim about anything and it doesn't actually make any sense, there's no logic behind it. They're not having a go at something in particular for no reason, even if the stated reason doesn't make any sense. So what it showed to me is that there's a kind of there is an underlying hostility among some people towards the Irish language. Now, there can be various sources of that. I mean, some of it is just a kind of a thing where claims just get repeated. And once they get repeated often enough, people just believe them. So hear often enough that, Gaelscoil are all middle class, then they might just end up believing it and just repeat it and said, "Oh, well, I heard Gaelscoil are all middle class," and that's just a belief that they come to have. I mean, there is definite prejudice. I mean, one of the things I did as part of the campaign was I did a thread on Twitter of quotes from articles in the media about the Irish language, and some of them are just atrocious. They're really bigoted and prejudiced and making all sorts of comparing Irish speakers to Nazis, Taliban, Stalinists, terrorists. One of the worst ones I think was, so a few years back there was a few secondary schools being amalgamated in Dingle, And I think maybe one of them might have been teaching through English, but the amalgamated school was going to be teaching through Irish. So some of the parents were kind of protested about this, and there was various stories in the newspaper. Um, but the examiner had an editorial that said that the school was setting itself up as a Finsbury Park mosque by the sea. So what refers to a mosque in London that was frequented by people in Al Qaeda, who, as in actual terrorists. So the comparison was between a group of Islamist terrorists in London with a school in the Gaeltacht that's going to teach through Irish. So, I mean, there's obviously a lot of, I don't know even how to describe the mentality behind that, but it's a very prejudiced or
You almost have to admire his creativity.
yeah.
It's just it's hard to actually kind of credit how somebody would make that connection.
Yeah, so I mean, part of it, I think a part of it did relate to the troubles with some of the journalists who write these type of things. In that a lot of the journalists who write, commentators who make these claims tend to be the ones who are very, I suppose, anti Sinn Féin, you could say, or anti-Republican, or very much of the view that the entire blame for the troubles and so on is on Republicans and Sinn Féin and so on. And for some reason, they seem to think that the Irish language was, I don't know, did they think it was part of that in some way? But there's definitely a strong crossover between people complaining about people with those types of attitudes and these attacks on the Irish language. But then I mentioned that some of these beliefs are hundreds of years old. So this idea about Irish being like a peasant language, like that goes back to the 18th century at least. It could even be older. And one thing I'm really interested in is the reasons why people stopped speaking Irish in the first place, because I think that's still relevant today. Because if some of those reasons still exist today, then it doesn't matter how much you promote the Irish language to people with those beliefs. They're not going to engage with it. So, like, if you look back at the historic record, you see like there's a lot of the quotes from the time will say from Daniel O'Connell will say, well, it's just useless. It has no practical purpose. But then a lot of other quotes refer to shame around the language, or that there's all these negative connotations around it. So, like Thomas Davis said in the 1840s that the middle class people think it's a sign of vulgarity to speak Irish. So that's a bit of an odd opinion to have. Why would an Irish person think it's a sign of vulgarity to speak Irish? But those types of beliefs led to people not speaking Irish to their children. So I think there's a strong chance that those beliefs were carried down through the generations. And in today's society, that they're kind of manifested by a lot of these other kind of claims that we hear about the Irish language, that it just comes from this kind of general negativity about Irish, but it may come out in things like, oh, well, it has lots of made up words, or the phonetics don't make any sense, and that type of thing.
And how do you counter those kinds of tropes then, Colm? Because that's obviously based on, well, obviously, it seems to me to be based on ignorance and certain kind of just repetition of these as he myths and misconceptions. How do you counter that then?
So normally just with kind of basic facts and logic, So the basic rule of thumb I have, which you can apply to any claim about the Irish language, is: does this claim make sense with other languages? So if it's true in the case of Irish, is it true? Do you apply the same rule to other languages? So if you're going to say Irish is dead, then that would mean that most of the world's languages are dead. because there's more fluent Irish speakers than most of the world's languages, which doesn't make any sense at all. Or if you're going to say, well, like Irish has lots of made up words, then we just need to look at other languages, look at English, look at French, look at German. Like they all borrow words from other languages. So the thing about the Irish language names, this is probably the newest one. And I suppose it's a good lesson in never accepting the premise of what of the claim in the first place. Always question the claim. Does the claim make any sense in the first place? So if we're saying that Irish names aren't phonetic, so I've heard people with Irish names saying, "Oh, it's not pronounced the way it's spelled," and then people will make a big deal out of the fact that the name Neve has an MH in it, and they say, "Well, how can MH sound like a V? That doesn't make any sense." And when I kind of started hearing this claim, my kind of initial reaction was, yeah, well, it's true, but who cares? It's our language, so we should be proud of it anyway. But then I just kind of noticed, like, the name John has a H in it. And we don't pronounce that H, and we don't even notice it's there. And the thing with the MH is, so, the name Stephen has a PH in it, and that's a V. But then Stephanie has a PH in it, and that's an F. And then Charles is CH, so that's a ch sound. But then Michael is a different sound. Michelle is a different sound. So you basically just go through all the lot of English names, and you can see the fact that they're not any more logical or phonetic than Irish names.
I mean, the example that I continually choose is Worcester sauce.
Yeah, that's true, but it's even more than that.
But I suppose the thing about it is that I find fascinating, Colm, is that, I mean, if you say, oh, it's not phonetic, but it's not phonetic if you're using the phonetics of English to try and understand the Irish word.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, I mean, yeah, of course, MH, that's what it's a V sound. And because another one that was mentioned recently was Saoirse. And people say, oh, it blows their complete mind that Saoirse, there's S with it's a seer, and then it's S as a sh. And you go, well, that's because the first S is broad and the second S is quail. And so the first S is seer and the second S is sh. And that, in the context of the phonetics of the Irish language, is absolutely, just bog standard, plain, simple, consistent every single time you see it. But we're being asked to justify it in the context of an English language.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I definitely point that out. It doesn't make any sense to use, English pronunciation with Irish names the same way. We don't use English pronunciation with French names. We say Francois. We don't say Francois. But the thing is, it's not just for your Worcester sauce and your Leicester. It's all of English spelling, basically. I mean, it's just chock-a-block of words or letters that aren't pronounced, or silence, or other combinations of letters that don't make any sense. So all the words that end in TION, like definition, information, so that TION is spelled SHUN. So if you were to apply the same logic to English, you wouldn't even understand it, even the word know, KNOW. Now the thing is, once you see this in English, you can't unsee it. If I'm reading English these days, a lot of the times I can see I am pronouncing it phonetically because now I can see that. Whereas beforehand, it's just something you're totally oblivious to. But it comes from the kind of an attitude that English is normal and everything else is not normal.
Isn't that the essence of the point? It's the kind of this cultural hegemony that English is normal and everything else then is deviating from that norm.
Yeah, no, that's it totally. Like, the name Hugh, and the Irish for Hugh is AODH, but then Hugh, HUGH. we don't even realize there's a GH there, and we don't pronounce it. And then you can use this with every second word in the English language almost.
And everybody will say Hugh perfectly, understand exactly what that word looks like and sounds like, but A is what the hell is going on there? I mean, it is insidious. I mean, you encounter it over and over and over again, and people are continually told that is a weird name. It doesn't make sense. It's impossible to pronounce, or whatever the case may be. But it's just trying to impose the English structure on the Irish
so I mean,
word.
it doesn't help when Irish people themselves kind of go along with the thing. I mean,
Yeah.
some Irish people are kind of encouraging this belief. I would just say, like, if somebody can master English spelling, then Irish should be a doddle for them, because as far as I know, it's much more consistent than English is. But the thing is, like, I mean, I'm sure there's valid historical reasons why the spelling of English words are the way they are. It's the same way Irish spelling is the way it is. So yeah, I mean, it is just interesting though that we keep that newer kind of myths are developing. It's not just totally kind of ancient historic ones that have been around for a long time.
I know that you're a big advocate for Gaelscoileanna and the whole Gaelscoil movement, and I just love your account of what that looks like in your community there in Clondalkin. But what is your sense of? 'Cause there's been a huge resurgence. I mean, for me, I suppose it was the Catherine Connolly campaign in the presidential election last year that seemed to just kind of touch a nerve or something in relation to Irish with younger people, particularly. And young people were, I think, central to that campaign. And I sense that a lot of that, and those young people have come out of the Gaelscoil movement, or who have come up through education, through the language, and for them it's natural. They don't have any of the hang-ups that I think many of my generation would have in relation to it. What's your sense of where we are now in relation to the language as a country and overall? And I know you're not a Gaeltacht person, that's not where you come from, but you are somebody who's deeply interested in the language. What's your sense of where we are now in relation to the language and its future?
So yeah, no, I'm not from the Gaeltacht, but I did live in Guidor for a year and a half. I have a huge interest in the Gaeltacht, and obviously wanted to survive and so on. I suppose there's a pattern that's been around for a long time, which is that the Gaeltacht is getting smaller, but the language is maybe growing outside of the Gaeltacht. And with the Gaeltacht, my kind of starting point is the Stadir Quimshahawk, Chongo Leocht. So this was the comprehensive linguistic study of the Gaeltacht that was released in 2008. And that was saying that the Gaeltacht had between like 15 and 20 years left with Irish as the main community language. So we're actually getting pretty close to the end of that period. And what's often not, I suppose, discussed is that what the study said was that where you had two native speakers, a couple, they tend to raise their children to Irish. But where you have a couple where one person speaks Irish and the other doesn't, they tend to speak English. According to the study, this is the main driving force for the decline of the Gaeltacht, the decline of Irish in the Gaeltacht. And the Gaeltacht is kind of either Gahin of Eltona, it's because it's in a bit of between a rock and a hard place, in that if there's no employment, then people emigrate. But then if there is employment, people move into the Gaeltacht, or people move back to the Gaeltacht. So what happens basically is people go to college, people move to Galway, they move to Dublin, they move to London, Sydney, wherever. And then they meet a partner and they move back to the Gaeltacht, and their children, they may or may not, they have a higher chance, I suppose, of not being brought up to Irish. And then according to the study, that will then change the language of the schoolyard. So in terms of trying to support the Gaeltacht, I know there's been a lot of emphasis on housing in recent years, and that's absolutely vital as well. But really, the driving force or the key thing is to try and protect the language, or it's ensure that the language is passed down within households. So whatever the government can do to support and encourage that they should be definitely doing that. That's my opinion anyway. And then, with the outside of the Gaeltacht, yeah, I mean, in the last few years, we've definitely seen a resurgence. It's becoming more prominent. You mentioned Catherine Connolly's campaign. I mean, that was a real example, a tangible example where Irish became a political tool or something of value from a political point of view. That there was a demand, a grassroots demand, that people said they want their president to be able to speak Irish. So, I mean, that's something new, and a lot of the political journalists were saying they were surprised at this was something that they weren't expecting. But it does show that attitudes are changing, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly why that is. Yeah, it could definitely be as a result of more people coming through the Gaelscoil system. That there's actually a connection between the Gaelscoils and the myths, because going to a Gaelscoil makes you immune to a lot of them. So I remember growing up when I'd hear people saying, "Oh, Irish is a dead language." And I'd be thinking, well, like I speak Irish fluently every 5 days a week, so how can it be dead? Or people say, "Oh, well, the only people who speak Irish are fishermen down on the west coast," and I'm thinking, well, that's not me, and I speak Irish, so that doesn't make any sense, Uh, so in ways, I think it should always be the natural state of things that Irish people would have a positive attitude towards the Irish language. I mean, if Irish people don't, then something has gone astray along the way. So I think a lot of it is this kind of colonial thing where slowly, where there was all these negative beliefs about the language in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, and that they've continued, but they're reducing basically, or they're fading away. The rare Gaelic.
And what about, okay, so you obviously this is something you've dedicated a huge amount of your time and life to. What kind of feedback have you had from people, let's say, who would be your target audience, people who maybe, labor under these myths or misconceptions? What reaction do you get from people when you go with that message?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very positive reaction. People will say, "Oh, I haven't thought about that before," or it just kind of opens their eyes and a lot of the time. And then from Irish speakers themselves, that they seem to get a lot of kind of encouragement from it, or a kind of a morale boost from it as well. One of the reasons why I'm interested in where these attitudes come from, and the historic attitudes, is because there are a lot of rules that people have around language. And kind of the ironic thing is that they're unspoken. So I'll give an example from English. So let's say you were to turn on the 6-1 news tomorrow, and they had like a new presenter on reading the news, and you were able. He was very articulate and so on, but he had an accent similar to Michael Healy-Rae. Now, if that was to occur, heads all over Ireland would just explode, because we have this rule in Ireland that if you're reading the news, you have to have a certain accent. There's no law that says that. There's no RTE or Virgin or any of the radio stations. They don't have an official policy that you have to sound like you're from South County Dublin to be able to read the news. But that rule is in force somehow, because obviously people have this belief that you have to sound a certain way to read the news. And then there's another rule, which is, I don't know if you've noticed, but the people who read the sports news on TV, they tend to have a bit more, there seems to be a bit of more of a liberal attitude to their accents. They can have more kind of working class or I don't even like the name regional accent, but non D4 accents. So like there's obviously this kind of rule that's being enforced somehow for that to come about. And I remember years ago, so you might remember the late 80s when local radio kind of came on the scene. And at the time, I was in primary school, but this was really exciting for me for whatever reason. You know, we had all these new stations, and I just remember being on holiday down in Cork and asking my dad to turn on the local radio and fully expecting to hear a Cork accent. And then what I heard was the exact same accents that were on the Dublin radio stations.
The mid-Atlantic kind of accent.
Yes. So that just kind of blew my mind at the time. It really kind of stood out. Like, why is that happening? So there are these rules that we have around language, around accents. There's a lot of when people are talking about like the Irish is the shame and associated with poverty. What I always point out is that that's actually a very common belief that people can have. So it's found all over the world where you have with minority languages, and it's found with say dialects, say like in Italy or Germany or France, and then it's also found just with accents in Ireland or in England and so on. So we associate different accents with different things. The result of that is people with certain accents are excluded from. You're not allowed to read the news, or you're not allowed to do X, Y, and Z. And then people end up changing their accents because of that. So, I mean, people sometimes talk about accents dying or accent leveling and so on, as if it's a kind of just a natural process, like birds migrating or something. It can also be a very conscious thing.
They're conforming to the what they feel needs to be the norm they need to be on to be accepted in society and so on. Yeah, that's fascinating.
That's just I mean that's a lot of what happened with the Irish language as well. That there was just this belief that English is this prestige, as whatever, and then Irish doesn't have that, so we should stop speaking Irish because of that. And there wasn't any point in history where people said, okay, well, we don't believe that anymore. That definitely carried over after independence and so on. So even though we got independence from the UK, there was still this cultural belief that Irish was inferior to English and so on. And not just from the use point of view, but from fashion or from prestige and things like
at a cultural level, Colm, there's one other thing that I was really keen to try and touch on if it's possible in the time we have available. But you've mentioned you've been researching the dialects of Irish historically spoken in Leinster, and I think that's a very fascinating kind of subject. Could you maybe just give us a little bit of an insight into what you're doing there?
Yeah, so I'm not a linguist myself, so I'm mainly gathering the work of other researchers, and I've put them all on a map and in Tableau, which is available to the public. So it's part of it is just to kind of look at an interest, local history interest, as in from Dublin or from Leinster. So I've an interest in the dialect that was spoken in my region in previous centuries. And another part of it is that it does have relevance today, in that you do hear, like, during debates about the Irish language, people will say, oh, well, sure, Irish hasn't been spoken in Dublin for hundreds of years, or was never spoken in Dublin, and this type of things. So there is a kind of, maybe people in Leinster don't feel as much kind of connection to the language, or they feel that maybe it's something that's more related to to Munster, to Connacht, to Ulster, and so on. Whereas, what I'm trying to do is to show people that they have an Irish language heritage in their own local area as well. So it's not just something that relates to the Gaeltacht regions of today, like that their own counties were Gaeltachts at one stage for most of their history. So that's the motivation behind it.
It's interesting. I remember meeting a chap from Meath, who had done something similar in terms of research. But one of the things he that I found it is because I remember speaking to him, and I said to him, "God, you have here's Ulster blast on you." And he said to me, "Well, that would have been the type of Irish spoken in that part of me that he was from would have been more Ulster Irish than anything else. That would have been the sound of it." Have you ever come across
Yeah,
anything
no,
like that?
absolutely. Yeah. So we had a secondary school and a teacher in secondary school from Meath who spoke like Donegal Irish. At the time, we thought
Yeah,
this was really weird. Like, why would somebody from Meath be speaking Donegal Irish? And it was only later that I found out
yeah.
that, yeah, that was the Irish spoken in Meath. Like, it was like there's recordings of people from Loud, native speakers from Loud, and the Irish in Meath was the same, more or less. And so it was like a sub dialect, you could say, of Ulster Irish. So that I suppose that's the type of thing I'm talking about. That people aren't kind of aware of of their own heritage.
And did that extend down into Dublin then as well, or do we have any record or kind of knowledge in relation to that, or have you encountered that?
So yeah, I mean, one of the questions is how far south did that Ulster Irish go? And nobody seems to know really. Theories like my kind of starting point was a book called Star in the Gaeilge, which was published in
Oh
1994. And there
yes.
was an article in there by Professor Nicholas Williams, and his theory was that like Louth and Meath were obviously kind of an Ulster type of Irish. There's recordings from Kilkenny that show that was more like Munster. But then his theory is that the rest of Leinster was more similar to Connacht Irish. And he had various kind of linguistic reasons for believing that. But I've come across a few academic papers since then that don't agree with that. So it's a bit of a grey area, I suppose, as well as just around people's history and have a connection with the language. It does have, you know, you actually have a big advantage over, say, a lot of learners in Leinster, because when you're from Cork, there is a living dialect of Cork. You can go there and speak to native speakers. You can go to Cork Agreed and speak to people who are speaking a very similar dialect. Whereas people in Leinster, they're learning a mix of dialects. And I mean, so I have a mix of dialects, and I can't go anywhere to speak to a native speaker who speaks like that. So that's a definite disadvantage in terms of fluency and so on. And also, I think it has a bit of an impact on people's confidence levels as well, in terms of, but it's this kind of dissonance between, we value the Irish language for heritage reasons, and we value the Irish of the Gaeltacht. But the Irish we're speaking, nobody has spoken Irish like this before, basically. So that
Mm,
can create a
mm,
bit of
mm.
dissonance. So I think one of the aims of what I'm doing is to show to teach people a bit about their own heritage, if they want to. As far as I know, in a lot of colleges, you have to pick a dialect to focus on. If people are in UCD or Trinity and they're told they have to do this, at least then they might have a bit of context about what was their own local dialect. So I suppose just one thing I wanted to kind of mention as well so with all these kind of myths that I'm talking about, my first kind of thing is to always question the assumptions behind the claim. People will say like, "Oh, Irish is useless," so there's no practical benefit to speak Irish. Now you can address that by saying, well, that's actually factually incorrect. You can say A, B, C, and D of the reasons why it is of practical benefit. Whereas I would be also saying, since when do we only do things for practical or useful reasons? We do lots of things. We do loads of things that don't have any practical or useful benefit to us. So the 21st of February, it's International Mother Language Day. So a few years ago, I just put something on Facebook kind of comparing, mother languages with your own mothers. So what I was saying was that, like, do you buy your mother a present on her birthday because it's of some practical benefit to you, or because it's useful in some way? Or do you get her something on Mother's Day because for financial reasons, or because she's cool, or because she's fashionable? Or do you just do it because she's your mother? That's the way I look at the Irish language. It's a way of moving the kind of framing around the language. So when people speak to me, well, what are the useful aspects of the Irish language? That's like someone saying to me, like, how tall are you? And then they give me weighing scales, which is a totally different kind of frame of reference.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea of the framing question. That's so insightful. And that brings me beautifully, I think, probably to the ultimate question that I'd like to ask you, Colm, that I ask each of the guests here. I mean, you've put a huge amount into that, the things that you've dedicated countless hours and periods of your life to, and particularly around the myth busting campaign that you've done in relation to the language and research in relation to some of the different aspects of it. Why do you do all of that? What motivates you? What is your Irish language? Why? Why do you do all that you do in relation to the language?
So the short answer is that I speak and promote the Irish language because it's the Irish language. That's the short version. So I suppose, like, if I really kind of thought about or tried to intellectualize it, I would say, because Irish has been spoken in Ireland for thousands of years. It's where it's the language that was spoken by most of our ancestors over their lives. It's where we got the name of our country from, the name of our provinces, our counties, our towns, our townlands. We're totally surrounded by Irish. Like, if I tried, I wouldn't be able to ignore the Irish language because I see it everywhere. And then there's, all of the amazing culture that came out of the Irish language, like our songs, our poetry, our stories, and so on. So I suppose that's the longer answer. But there's a different kind of version of that question, the kind of skeptical question, like, why would, what's wrong with you? Like, why on earth would you speak the Irish language? So I think we need to, if we're ever kind of challenged with that, well, we need to get to a point where that isn't even a question, because it shouldn't be a question, because it's self-evident why an Irish person would have an interest in the Irish language. The closest comparison I can come to is like a sports team. Like, why do I support the Irish rugby team? Why do I support the Irish soccer team? Why do people in Cork support the Munster rugby team? We don't even ask these questions because they're so self-evident. And let's say you were to take like a less successful sporting team, like let's say you were to meet someone from Longford, and they said, "Oh, I support Longford Town." Like, nobody would say, "Well, why? Like, why do you support Longford Town?" I mean, it's just it's so obvious. The person's from Longford, so they support Longford Town. So it's the same with Irish. It shouldn't even be a question. It's so self-evident.
I love that. I love that, Colm. I mean, again, a wonderful reframing of the question, and a beautiful answer to it. A Colm a Cara, when it's on soltas and scale a rhyme to lin, gurv mila mahagat flishin, berbua agus banat. Thanks for listening. Gurv mila mahagat asabe eishtag. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I would really appreciate your feedback and would be eternally grateful if you would follow, rate, and review the show. Please also be sure to sign up at thelanguagequestion.com/resources to get your free valuable learning resources and to stay up to date with upcoming episodes, guests, and to receive exclusive content. Slán